We last saw that the great famine had spread through the land and that the sons of Jacob were sent back to Egypt so as to acquire more grain. However, you could say that this venture was anxiety-inducing for all who were involved. First, it had been a requirement of Joseph, who had risen so high up on the Egyptian political ladder that not even his brothers could recognize him, that if the brothers ever came back to Egypt, they would need to bring their youngest brother Benjamin. This, as we learned, was not as easy as it sounded, because Jacob loved Benjamin almost as much as he had loved Joseph, and so wasn't keen on letting him out of his sight. Worse yet, Joseph had imprisoned their brother Simeon, and would only release him on the condition that Benjamin was brought before him. In this sense, Jacob was forced to concede and allow Benjamin to travel with his brothers, the very same brothers who had sold Joseph into slavery. To complicate matters even more, the brothers had come to realize that on their return home from Egypt, their sacks had been filled with silver that wasn't theirs, and so they were concerned that upon returning, they would be apprehended as thieves and thrown into prison. Luckily though, when they arrived, Joseph assured them that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. It was actually a scheme of his own to test his brother's integrity. With that out of the way, Simeon was released from his imprisonment, and a meal was prepared, where all the siblings sat reunited, unbeknownst that the brother they had beaten and sold was right there amongst them, calling all the shots. In fact, Genesis reveals to us that though Joseph was nearly moved to tears at the sight of his brothers, particularly his younger brother Benjamin, who was pretty innocent in the whole saga, he wasn't quite done messing with the older ones who had scorned him. Genesis 44 tells us, "Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain." And he did as Joseph said. Indeed, where the brothers had been alarmed to find the silver that had been placed in their sacks the first time around, they were bound to be devastated to find that Benjamin's sack contained the cup of Joseph, and thus was sure to be incriminated as a thief. We see that when morning dawns, the brothers set off on their way back to Canaan. It's reasonable to believe that they were in good spirits about their time in Egypt. They had freed their brother Simeon. They'd managed to return the silver that had been put in their sacks without any recourse, and they'd managed to keep Benjamin safe, which they were well aware was imperative to their father's health and well-being. Yet they don't get very far before Joseph sends his steward to apprehend his brothers, telling him, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.'" The steward does in fact catch up to the brothers, and these words are relayed unto them, much to their confusion. Naturally, the brothers were pretty confident that they'd been falsely accused, because they not only had no use for such a silver cup, supposedly used for divinations, but they'd already returned the silver that had ended up in their sacks the first time. They tell the steward, "We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house?" The brothers are certain that none of them would have taken the cup. In fact, they are so certain about it, they go as far as to suggest that if the steward finds the cup on any of them, then the culprit can be killed on the spot, and the rest of them can be enslaved. What's interesting here is that the steward doesn't agree to the suggestion exactly, but rather he tweaks the wording of it, saying, "Let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame." Evidently, the steward didn't want to kill any of them, even if they were found guilty, and he also didn't want to enslave the rest of them as per the brothers' self-appointed forfeit. Some argue that the steward knew of Joseph's plans, and knew that this was merely a test against his brothers to weigh their character, and so he knew better than to actually kill the culprit. Each of the brothers open their sacks for inspection, and the steward is shown to go through each one, starting with the oldest and ending with the youngest. We are told, "And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this they tore their clothes. They all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city." The brothers are shown here to be not just confused as to how that cup ended up in Benjamin's sack, but also horrified. They concern themselves not with Benjamin's guilt, knowing that he couldn't have possibly done such a thing and had been obviously framed, but with the reality that he was now going to be enslaved. This confirmed their father's worries and anxieties about Benjamin. They were now indeed going to have to return home without Jacob's favourite son, and there Jacob would probably die from the grief of it all. Judah would have probably found himself to be in the worst position of this dilemma, for in the previous chapter he had promised his father Benjamin's safe return, and would bear the burden of his casualty all by himself if such a thing transpired. He told his father, "I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." To their credit, the brothers do not shirk their responsibilities, and whilst Benjamin is taken by the steward back to Egypt, the brothers go with him, despite being free from all blame, according to the conditions of the search, and free to go home. This is a stark contrast to when Joseph was sold into slavery. Back then, the brothers had all but celebrated Joseph's disappearance. Now though, they were willingly condemning themselves to return to Egypt with Benjamin, almost willingly sharing his fate. To some scholars, this is evident that the brothers had changed since that day in the desert, where they orchestrated Joseph's disappearance, and that they had now matured into men who were no longer jealous or bitter, but instead honourable and protecting. When they get back to Egypt, Judah and his brothers throw themselves on the ground before Joseph in supplication. Yet Joseph is in no mood to hear anything from them. Instead, he goes on the attack, berating them, saying, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" Yet again, it's interesting that by throwing themselves on the floor in front of Joseph, they actualized the dreams that he had spoken of decades before, where they would all bow down before him. It was the vocalization of these dreams that may have incentivized the brothers to beating Joseph up and selling him off into slavery in the first place, for they most likely found his words to be insulting and condescending, especially considering that he was the youngest amongst them. So it's ironic that they all readily throw themselves beneath him on their own accord and beg him for mercy. This act of prostrating also shows us that the brothers had learned some form of humility. They aren't shown to be abrasive and outraged over the injustice of what has transpired, but rather seek forgiveness and empathy for the perceived transgression that was ultimately out of their hands. In a way, it might be said that the brothers knew they were innocent, and so did not need to demonstrate aggression to clear Benjamin's name. In fact, such a reaction may have very well been detrimental to their case, and might have made them look all the more guilty. What's more, we also see here that grovelling is not beyond the brothers, which speaks to the severity of the situation. They knew it would be catastrophic to have returned to their father without Benjamin, and were probably prepared to do anything to avoid that outcome at all costs. Begging, therefore, was a small price to pay. Judah begins, "What can we say to my lord? What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves, and the one who was found to have the cup." Here Judah volunteered himself and his other siblings into servitude, for as he stated, the Lord had uncovered their guilt. Indeed, they might have been innocent of stealing the cup, but they were guilty of a far greater crime some 20 years prior, the selling of Joseph into slavery. Judah effectively resigned himself and his brothers to this karmic fate. They had made a slave out of their younger brother. Now they too were to become slaves. The punishment fit the crime, and whilst they were aware that they had been falsely accused, they still nonetheless accepted the punishment, believing it was, in the grand scheme of things, what they deserved. Joseph, though, does not accept their guilt and self-imposed servitude. He tells them only the man who had the cup would be enslaved, because that was fair. The rest of them could go back to their father in peace. Judah is once again shown to be the leader of the outfit, taking it upon himself to address Joseph, who he believes to be equal to the Pharaoh himself. He tells him of everything that had transpired in getting Benjamin to join them on this venture, as he had previously requested, and that it was very difficult for their father to grant them permission to take Benjamin with them, for their father loved Benjamin the most. He explains that their father had ultimately suspected them of foul play for the loss of their other younger brother, who of course was Joseph himself, and that if they managed to lose this last younger brother in Benjamin, then their father would probably succumb to grief and lose the will to live. Judah pleads, "So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the grey head of our father down to the grave in sorrow." Judah's appeal, which appears to be quite heartfelt and genuine, is quite a far cry from the man we've seen in previous chapters. He who schemed against his daughter-in-law, and who didn't seem all that reluctant to lie to his father as to where Joseph had ended up. Back then, Judah wasn't shown to care at all about his father's distress when they reported Joseph's disappearance, yet now he is shown to treat the matter of his father's well-being with paramount importance. Perhaps this is yet another sign that Judah and his brothers had well and truly changed. For where they were self-centered and apathetic before, they now plead earnestly for their brother and put their father's life on something of a pedestal. Judah's appeal ends with a flare of heroism, for he tells Joseph, "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No. Do not let me see the misery that would come on my father." In this final turn, we see that Judah has gone from a man who schemed to be rid of a brother to a man who would sacrifice his own life to save one. Truly, his redemption arc is actualized here, for this is no grandstand gesture, but truly a proposal that would see him endure slavery so that Benjamin didn't have to, and perhaps equally, so that his father would not know a life without him. Now, you might say that Judah had already staked his own life on Benjamin's safety before they left for Egypt. He was effectively damned if he did and damned if he didn't. Truth be told, it could be the case that for Judah, enduring slavery for the rest of his days would have actually been a kinder fate than having to bear the bad news to his father and be blamed by him for having lost Benjamin too. Genesis 44 provides a compelling demonstration of the transformed hearts of Joseph's brothers, showcasing their moral and emotional growth since their earlier betrayal of Joseph. Their response to the challenges set before them in this chapter illustrates a profound shift in character, emphasizing loyalty, humility, and love for one another. The brothers are no longer the bullies seen in Genesis 37. We can see indications of their change in such instances as their reaction to Benjamin receiving the larger portion in the previous chapter. Unlike their jealousy toward Joseph in their youth, they now show no resentment toward Benjamin's special treatment. This acceptance highlights their growth in maturity and their willingness to embrace familial unity rather than succumb to rivalry. Moreover, when Joseph's silver cup is discovered in Benjamin's sack, the brothers do not turn on each other or seek to shift blame. Instead, they collectively stand together, demonstrating a newfound trust that was absent when they conspired against Joseph years earlier. Their unity is further proven when, instead of abandoning Benjamin to his fate, they all return to Egypt in solidarity. Nonetheless, it is Judah's willingness to sacrifice himself for Benjamin that serves as the ultimate proof of their changed hearts. He offers to take Benjamin's place as a slave, an act of selflessness and devotion both to his younger brother and to his father. But how did Joseph react to this heartfelt speech by the brother who had effectively decided his fate all those years ago? Well, for that, you'll need to tune in for the next episode. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's video, then don't forget to leave this video a like, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next installment. Until next time.